I knew things were headed off a cliff the second Lucas Grant held up my access card like he'd just bagged a deer. Don't worry, Madison's got this now. He grinned, dangling my government issued credential between two fingers like it was a library card. Madison, the intern. 18, maybe 19, still calling spreadsheets vibes. She gave me this awkward little wave while sipping her pumpkin cream cold brew like she hadn't just been handed the nuclear launch codes. I didn't argue, didn't flinch. Just logged into my token auth backup server under the table and started a full mirror of the federal audit chain. Timestamps, encryption keys, role hierarchy, revocation triggers. If he wanted a streamlined future, he could have it with both hands wrapped around a lit fuse. By the way, if you're still here listening, and stats say 97% of people are, go ahead and tap subscribe and give the video a like. It tells the team we're doing something right. Now back to the moment everything fell apart. For 9 years, I was the boring woman in the corner with the 3-monitor setup and a sticker that said, "Encrypt like you mean it." Everyone assumed I just filed forms. They didn't realize each checkbox on those forms mapped to real-time security controls, some of which, if skipped, triggered automatic federal suspensions. I didn't invent the system. I just understood it better than anyone else, because someone had to. The CEO called me the anchor. Legal called me that walking SOP. But Lucas? Lucas called me legacy clutter. He waltzed in from some VC-funded tech circus, fresh off a failed AI startup full of swagger and smart casual buzzwords. Digital transformation, he kept saying. End-to-end transparency. Horizontal synergies. He threw out acronyms like confetti without knowing any of them meant jail time if misfiled. First week, he asked what CUI stood for. I told him, Controlled Unclassified Information. He blinked like I'd spoken in Morse code. Second week, he asked for my workflow hack. I told him my workflow was federal law. Third week, he took my badge and handed it to an unpaid intern with no clearance, no training, and no idea she was now the legal contact of record on 4 active export-controlled contracts, which, by the way, meant we were now in technical breach of FAR 52.2049. And if you don't know what that means, congratulations. You're exactly like Lucas. The worst part? He didn't even look malicious, just smug. The kind of smug that thinks compliance is just a boring checkbox exercise you can automate with a Canva template and a strong coffee. He genuinely thought he was saving the company from itself. So I sat. I waited. And I logged the moment my clearance-linked login pinged, revoked. The portal spat out a review flag. Not an alert, not a warning, a flag, which in my world is code for, let the storm come. I opened my secure notebook and wrote one line, let it ride. Then I closed it and went home. Madison was in charge now. Let's see how she handled procurement encryption hierarchies, rotating SSH credentials, and the part where a single wrong digit on a quarterly report could suspend $8.6 million in active contract revenue. Lucas didn't see the bomb. He just saw paperwork. I was just the filing cabinet, the woman with the badge nobody respected, until the system locked itself shut. The email subject line read, Compliance Reimagined. As if the federal government gave a damn about branding. Lucas had sent it out company-wide at 6:04 a.m., like some kind of caffeine-fueled messiah. Inside, a glossy PDF deck full of stock photos and slogans. One team, one dashboard, zero bureaucracy. I stared at it for a second longer than I should have, then minimized the window and opened my version of reimagination. A terminal full of rotating encryption logs and metadata integrity flags blinking like Christmas lights. Lucas strutted into the compliance suite like he owned oxygen. We're consolidating, he said, dragging a dry erase marker across the org chart. Departmental overlap is killing agility. We need leaner teams and digital fluency. We're moving paperwork to the people who actually understand UI. Then he clapped Madison on the shoulder like she was a golden retriever. She'll shadow you, learn the ropes. We'll simplify the compliance stack by EOY. She smiled like she was told to. I didn't ask questions. I never do. I just set up a read-only sandbox profile for her, locked from any right privileges, and watched her try to open a .gov portal without multi-factor authentication. It says I need a key, she mumbled. It is a key, I muttered. She didn't get it. Lucas didn't care. 2 days later, he leaned over my desk holding out his hand like a mall cop. Badge, please, we're revamping credentials and centralizing access. You'll still have internal visibility, just not ownership. Nothing personal, just modernization. I stared at him for one long second. Then I handed it over. He smiled, dropped it in a padded envelope, and walked out, humming something offbeat and vaguely condescending. At 12:11 p.m., my phone buzzed. Clearance-linked credential revoked. System note, initiating review, FAR 52.21049 violation risk. And just like that, the spine of our federal infrastructure froze like a pulled muscle. I sat back in my chair and clicked open my private compliance vault. It pinged open like a steel drawer. Years of documentation. Every clause, every subclause, every escalation protocol, every trigger warning from every federal vendor we'd ever contracted with. All mapped, time-stamped, cross-referenced, and quietly watermarked with my credential hash. The best part? The system had no override. The only person who could reassign an authorized contact was someone who had already passed Tier 3 clearance. That person used to be me. Now, nobody. I opened a secure note in my encrypted journal and typed exactly 8 words. FAR 52.2049 clause triggers full freeze. Let it ride. Then I closed the laptop and started on my lunch. Lucas thought he'd streamlined compliance. What he'd done was unplug the pressure valve from a boiler he didn't know was ticking. A real leader would have asked why one checkbox on a portal could tank $11.2 million in renewables grants. A real strategist would have known that some forms aren't busy work. They're handshakes with institutions that don't forget. But Lucas? He just liked slide decks. And the intern? She still didn't know how to log out. The truth is, I didn't set out to make myself indispensable. I set out to make sure we never missed a deadline that could cost us a contract. That's the part they never understand. The system didn't revolve around me because I had an ego. It revolved around me because no one else gave a damn about building something bulletproof. It started 5 years ago with a single line item buried in a procurement memo. Eligibility for renewable energy subsidy contingent on verified export compliance. Simple sentence. Millions tied to it. No one read it except me. I stayed late that night and wrote the first draft of our internal compliance protocol. No AI, no automation. Just understanding what federal acronyms meant when translated into liability. I took the online courses no one volunteered for. Sat through the video trainings that made your skin peel from boredom. Got fingerprinted at a government facility with chairs older than my niece. Passed Tier 3 background clearance twice, then I built the system. Encrypted login chains embedded in contract metadata, clearance-linked triggers tied to user IDs, portal handshakes that only worked with a valid clearance key. If you revoked the credential, the chain collapsed. No more auto-renewals, no more compliance submissions, no more contract legitimacy. Did I tell anyone? Sure, in the documentation. Page 46, Appendix B. Nobody read it. Every time we won a new contract, I onboarded it myself. Set up the folder structure, mapped out the reporting timeline, mirrored it to my compliance vault, and keyed it to my credential hash. Nobody ever offered to help. Nobody asked how it worked. They just assumed the reports filed themselves, that the pop-up reminding them of the Q3 validation date came from the air, that the portal status lights turned green by magic. Lucas never asked how the lights stayed green. He only saw the filing cabinet, the woman with the lanyard and the spreadsheets and the ancient terminal with a wallpaper that read, "Silence logs everything." But I didn't resent him. I didn't resent any of them, because resentment is a waste of RAM. Instead, I built quietly. Every month, another invisible lock, another protocol tied to trust, not title. Ghost systems, we used to call them in training. Systems that only activated when things went wrong. Fail-safes that sat silent until arrogance flipped a switch. I didn't plan for Lucas to pull that switch, but I'd structured the infrastructure assuming one day someone would. And when they did, the system would follow the logic it was built on. No clearance, no access, no compliance, no contracts. Simple as that. Lucas always presented like a TED Talk that nobody asked for. That Tuesday morning, he burst into the conference room 5 minutes late, MacBook in one hand, a half-eaten granola bar in the other, smiling like a man who'd just Googled leadership. On the screen behind him, Compliance 2.0, decentralized and intern-led. Big, bold, centered, like it was a tech launch and not a federally regulated liability. We've submitted all our monthly reports ahead of schedule, he announced, smug enough to drown in. Madison's been fantastic, really stepping up. This is the kind of agility we've been missing. Someone clapped. Probably Brent from sales. I said nothing. Just sat at the back with my tablet open to the federal submission portal. No green lights, no confirmations, no uploads logged from an approved credential. Because nothing had been submitted. Not correctly. By Thursday, the warning hit. First, a red banner across our primary client's dashboard, submission invalid, unauthorized contact. The system had flagged Madison's attempt and cross-referenced it against the active credential list. No match, because she didn't exist in the database. Then the second hit came. Review flag triggered. Contractual access suspended pending verification. Translation? We were locked out. Entire contract on pause. No invoices processed, no deliverables accepted, no revenue cleared. And all because someone thought Google Docs and Canva slides could substitute for security clearance and federal access keys. At 9:16 a.m., legal pinged me in Slack. The message was almost charming in its cluelessness. Hey, weird one. Your login's bouncing. Any idea why? Client says something about verification. I stared at it for a few seconds, took a slow sip of cold coffee, and typed back, FAR Clause 9.3a, Clearance Dependency Breach. You'll need to initiate a re-auth cycle. I didn't add emojis, didn't sign it, just sent the line. Silence. The kind that doesn't feel empty, the kind that lands like weight, because now they understood. Lucas had built nothing. He dismantled a system he didn't understand, handed the wreckage to an intern who didn't know what FAR stood for, and now the federal government had shut the gates. And me? I'd already started logging the fallout. Every form rejected, every contract paused, every dollar frozen. Not out of spite, out of habit. Because when the alarms go off, you don't scream, you document, you let the silence speak louder than any presentation slide ever could. It started with the kind of email no one wants to open before coffee. 7:42 a.m., straight from the Procurement Oversight Unit, subject line, immediate contract suspension notice. No soft open, no wiggle room, just a full stop. Effective immediately, all active federal contracts are paused pending re-verification of the authorized compliance officer. No one had to ask what that meant. It meant everything froze, every account, every timeline, every deliverable. We'd gone from billable to blackout in 6 paragraphs. No payments incoming, no work authorized, no way forward until someone with Tier 3 clearance reactivated the account, someone who didn't currently exist in their records. Within minutes, I could feel the tremors ripple across the company. Vendors started calling, wondering why their invoices bounced back. Engineers stood around waiting for access to locked systems. Program managers were refreshing dashboards that now just blinked error. Access suspended like a digital death knell. Lucas? He was in the break room, gripping a coffee he hadn't sipped, staring at the wall like it might explain encryption protocols to him. Wait, he muttered, barely audible. Who had clearance again? There was a silence, thick and awkward. Someone from IT finally spoke, almost apologetically. Wasn't that her? Eyes turned. Phones came out. My personal cell lit up at 8:05. I watched it ring on the table, Lucas's name glowing like a fire alarm. I let it ring. At 8:19, Legal sent their second email of the week, shorter this time, less swagger, more desperation. Do you know what's required to reassign compliance credentials? I replied at 8:23. Replacements require a new Tier 3 background check. Average wait time, 6 or 8 weeks. No greeting, no sign-off, just the truth. The kind that lands like a hammer. The same kind of hammer I'd tried to warn them about when they laughed off paperwork as a liability. Now they were 6 to 8 weeks away from cash flow, contract deliverables, and any hope of getting out from under federal review. I didn't gloat. Didn't smile, just documented the timeline, same as always. Lucas was still standing in the break room, staring into his cup like the answer was floating at the bottom. There was no answer in there, only the quiet realization that arrogance, unlike clearance, doesn't unlock anything. The call was already underway when they patched me in. Audio only. No one wanted to make eye contact for what came next. Ms. Hart, the liaison from the Department of Procurement said, her voice clipped and matter-of-fact. We've been informed that your company attempted to file Q4 compliance through an unverified contact named Madison? Lucas jumped in before I could speak. She's an intern, super sharp, tech-savvy. We're modernizing the structure. Silence. Then the liaison replied, flat as a shutdown notice. She has no clearance. You remove the only credentialed officer on record. That constitutes a breach of Section 5.3 of your contract. Your firm is now flagged under compliance failure protocol. Lucas made a noise like someone halfway between a cough and an apology. The CEO spoke next. What do we need to do to unfreeze the contracts? The line was quiet. Then, you'll need to assign an authorized contact with active Tier 3 clearance, pass re-verification protocols, and issue signed documentation, acknowledging custodial chain restoration. They all turned to me. Even over the phone, you could feel it. I let the silence ride a second longer than necessary. Then I spoke clearly, calmly, like I was walking them through an onboarding they should have paid attention to years ago. System reactivation requires credentials to be reassigned, either to me or someone who clears Tier 3. That process takes 6 to 8 weeks on average. I already have clearance and the original key pair is still secured in my possession. So yes, I can reinstate the system. A breath of relief swept through the call, and then I finished the sentence. But I'll need a formal contract update to proceed. Legal made a noise like they'd swallowed their tongue. I kept going. And a retainer agreement. Monthly, retroactive to the date my credentials were revoked. Full compliance authority, audit veto rights, and final say on contract file submissions. No exceptions. Lucas tried to interject. I heard paper rustling, maybe some flailing, maybe a mouse getting dragged across a desk in desperation. Those are the terms, I said. You want the lights back on, you agree to them. Nobody argued, because there was nothing to argue with. The federal systems didn't run on ego. They ran on clearance, and the only person still holding that clearance was the woman they'd tried to replace with a Canva slide and a pumpkin spice resume. Lucas had bet on modernization. I'd built for reality. And now, reality had a price. By Monday, panic had turned to paperwork, the kind that stains reputations, not just spreadsheets. Legal launched an internal review to explain why our clearance-holding compliance officer had been stripped of credentials without so much as a signature trail. It didn't take long to find the problem. Lucas had yanked my access without authorization, without notice, and, most damning of all, without documenting a reassignment protocol. The finding was blunt. No custodial chain observed, credential removal unverified, authorization absent. Translation? He'd gone rogue in a button-down. Lucas tried spinning it, called it an unfortunate admin oversight in an emergency debrief, said things like, "We were moving fast. I assumed the new process covered it." You could hear the desperation beneath the buzzwords. The CEO, arms crossed, didn't say a word for nearly a minute, then turned to legal. "We never approved a reassignment, right?" Legal didn't hesitate. "There's no paper trail. That's on him." Silence. I didn't gloat, didn't need to. The air was already heavy with the weight of consequence. That afternoon, the CEO called me in. "We'd like you to resume your role, head of compliance, same title, full access restored." I smiled, polite but brief. "I'd prefer to remain independent." He blinked. "Consulting?" "Exactly." I handed him a one-pager I'd drafted over the weekend. Monthly retainer, remote first. Decision authority over all compliance protocols. Final signature rights on any government-facing submission. Audit veto power, effective retroactively. No exceptions, no delays. He didn't even flinch. Just nodded and passed it to legal. Lucas wasn't in that meeting. He was down the hall, still listed on Slack as VP Strategy, but the word around the floor said otherwise. When I passed his desk, his screen was empty. No decks, no dashboards, no interns in sight, just him, staring at nothing, like he still hadn't fully processed what he'd broken. I stopped, pulled a yellow sticky note from my pocket, wrote 6 words, slid it onto his keyboard without saying a thing. Next time, don't hand federal systems to interns. Then I walked away. Not because I'd won anything, but because in my world, systems don't forgive. They just wait. The new badge came in a plain envelope, no ceremony, just a strip of plastic and a barcode that now unlocked more than it ever had. It read, Hart, P, Principal Compliance Architect. No title inflation, no shiny department name, just clarity. That's all I ever needed. I didn't return to the same office, didn't want to. I took a small room near the server closet. Quiet, cold, perfect. No one knocked. No one bothered me. The contract had ensured that, remote first, veto power over audits, and immunity from strategy brainstorms masquerading as meetings. I wasn't staff anymore. I was infrastructure. My name appeared at the bottom of every federal portal we used, now tagged as primary federal contact. On some systems, my credential hash was the only one authorized to complete critical actions. The auto-renewals kicked back in. Suspended contracts went green. Funds resumed like someone had flipped the circuit breaker back on. No one said thank you. That was fine. I didn't build systems for applause. I built them to run. Lucas got moved to a smaller office near the cafeteria. Glass walls, no privacy, no terminals. A desk, a monitor turned off, and a corporate-issued laptop that hadn't seen a password in weeks. He still showed up at 9, still carried the same messenger bag like he had somewhere important to be. But his badge didn't open much anymore. As for Madison, the intern who almost became the face of a federal breach, she now handled office supply requests and scheduling room calendars. Someone had asked her once if she was still shadowing me. She shook her head. I think I broke something, she whispered. For once, she wasn't wrong. The CEO asked if I wanted an announcement, a press release, some fanfare to let the world know compliance was back under control. I told him no. I preferred silence. Silence is where the system breathes. It's where the logic flows, where each rule and clause moves like a current beneath the surface. Nobody notices the engineer until the bridge collapses. So I stayed beneath, tuning the load, watching every audit pass like clockwork. Lucas never spoke to me again. Didn't need to. He saw the badge. He saw the name under authorized contact. He saw the quiet machine come back to life, not because of him, but in spite of him. That was the new normal, and I made sure it stayed that way. 6 months passed like clockwork, because that's how I designed it. Every audit cleared, every federal contract renewed without a single note from procurement. The money flowed again, the systems hummed, and no one dared ask what made it all tick. Then, one Thursday, in a room full of suits and startup optimism, a new federal vendor asked the question that stopped the meeting cold. Who's your contact for export compliance? We need someone with active Tier 3. The room went still. Eyes flicked to the COO, who didn't hesitate. He simply turned and pointed. She's right there. I didn't speak. Just reached for the folder, flipped to the last page, and signed where I always did, with a pen that had outlived 3 executives. The portal pinged instantly. Authorized by Penelope Hart, clearance verified. No discussion, no back and forth, no PowerPoint explaining why I was the one. Just a green confirmation and the soft mechanical click of a system moving forward. Lucas was at the far end of the table, pretending to read something on his tablet. He didn't look up. Not when the form posted, not when the room nodded, not when the vendor smiled and said, "Well, that's all we need." He knew. He knew the difference between confidence and clearance, between charisma and control, between the person who gives the order and the one who holds the keys. As we filed out, one of the newer analysts fell into step beside me. Probably hadn't been around when the freeze happened. Maybe 23, fresh out of grad school, still wide-eyed about office culture. "How'd you get that kind of trust?" she asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. I didn't stop walking, didn't change my tone. "I read the fine print," I said. "Then I build systems around it. No more, no less." Behind me, the hallway filled with soft conversation. The day went on. People moved forward. But the system stayed where it was, stable, silent, watching. And me? I stayed behind the controls, where I belonged.